The night was dragging on and I was exhausted. I'd been driving for what felt like forever, the highway stretching out in front of me like an endless black ribbon. I was heading home after visiting some friends in a nearby town, and my fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty. The road was deserted, with only the occasional flickering street lamp to break the monotony of the darkness. After what seemed like hours of seeing nothing but empty road and shadows, I finally spotted a faint light in the distance. It was a gas station, its dim glow cutting through the blackness like a beacon. I was relieved. I really needed to refuel and get off this desolate stretch. When I pulled into the station, I immediately noticed how rundown it looked. The lights were barely hanging on, flickering sporadically, and the gas pumps were rusty and worn. The whole place had an old, neglected vibe. The only person around was the gas station attendant, a man in his late 50s, I'd guess. He had this vacant look on his face, barely acknowledging my presence. The whole atmosphere was eerily quiet, with nothing but the low hum of the gas pump filling the silence. As I was filling up my tank, my instincts were telling me there was something wrong. The attendant's stare was unnerving. His eyes seemed distant and hollow, almost like he wasn't really seeing me. It gave me a chill, but I tried to brush it off and finished refueling as quickly as I could. I headed inside to pay for the gas, hoping the store would feel a bit more normal. But as soon as I walked in, I was hit by this eerie quietness. The place was dusty and cluttered, with shelves of goods that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. A dim fluorescent light flickered overhead, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. I spotted a sign on the counter that read, "Closed for maintenance." It didn't make sense since the gas station was clearly open. Just as I was about to leave, the attendant appeared behind me out of nowhere. He grabbed my arm with a grip that was surprisingly cold. Leaning in close, he whispered urgently, "You need to go, now." His voice was serious, and his blank stare made my skin crawl. I was immediately filled with a sense of dread, not sure what to do next. I yanked my arm away from the attendant's icy grip, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't waste a second. I bolted out of the store and practically ran to my car. Every part of me was screaming to get out of there as fast as possible. I jumped into the driver's seat and sped away from the gas station. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the gas station lights flickering wildly, then plunging into darkness. Within seconds, the whole place was swallowed by the night, and it was like it had vanished completely. I drove faster, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that creepy, deserted spot. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unsettling experience from last night. I turned on the news, hoping some distraction would help me forget about that weird gas station. But as I watched, the newscaster started talking about a gas station that had been shut down for over a year. The station had been closed due to a series of violent crimes, and it had been off limits to the public for a long time. My jaw dropped as I realized it was the same place I'd stopped at. I'd unknowingly driven to a site with a dark history, and it had been closed for a significant amount of time. The fact that I had been there, witnessed that eerie encounter, and then saw the lights go out just deepened the mystery. It seemed to me that I had narrowly escaped something much worse. As I reflected on that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the strange encounter with the attendant and how the gas station's lights had suddenly gone out. Everything about the night felt off, and I was left with a nagging sense that something was seriously wrong. The experience haunted me. I kept replaying the events in my mind, wondering what might have happened if I hadn't left so quickly. The fear of the unknown and the unsettling memory of that gas station lingered with me, casting a shadow over my thoughts long after the incident. In the end, I had no idea how much danger I was in at that station, and where I never intend to go again. I recently went through something very disturbing, and I want to share it with you. My name is Anna, and I'm 22, so I had just moved into this new apartment. I was super excited. New place, new start, and all that. The neighborhood seemed really quiet and friendly, just the kind of place I was looking for. I was ready to settle in and enjoy my new space. Anyway, things started off pretty normal. I unpacked, got everything set up, and was finally feeling at home. But then, out of nowhere, I started getting these weird messages on my phone from some anonymous number. At first, they seemed like random junk, just some spam or something. But then I noticed they were mentioning things about my daily routine. Like, the messages knew what time I left for work, what I had for breakfast, and even what I did in the evenings. I thought it was probably just some dumb prank or a wrong number. I mean, who has the time to actually track someone like that? I figured someone was just messing with me and decided to ignore it. I was too busy trying to get my new apartment feeling just right to let it bother me. As days went by, the messages kept coming, but they weren't just random anymore. They started getting really specific, talking about the exact time I'd leave for work and even what TV shows I was watching. I'd get messages like, "I see you're watching that new series again tonight," or "heading to work at 8 a.m., right?" It was seriously unsettling. I tried to brush it off, but it wasn't easy. My unease started creeping up every time I looked at my phone. It was like someone was just a little too interested in my life. Then I began noticing other weird stuff. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear faint noises outside my window. It sounded like footsteps or something scratching against the wall, but when I looked, there was never anyone there. To make matters worse, I started feeling this constant, inexplicable chill, even when the heat was cranked up. It was like the air itself was off. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head. But no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, I couldn't ignore the growing dread that someone was watching me. One evening, I was just chilling on the couch watching TV and trying to unwind after a long day. Out of nowhere, I saw a shadow moving past my window. I jumped up and looked outside, but there was nothing there, just the quiet, empty street. I was starting to suspect that I was being watched. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. The anxiety was through the roof. I started double-checking all the locks on my doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. I even kept the curtains drawn tight, just to be safe. I thought about calling my landlord or the local police, but I was terrified of sounding like a paranoid idiot. What if I was overreacting? I didn't want to be that person who calls the cops over a shadow, so I just kept to myself, trying to convince myself it was all in my head, even though every sound made me even more anxious. One day, while I was cleaning the apartment, I happened to move the vent cover in the living room. That's when I saw it. A small, hidden camera wedged behind it. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe it. I started searching frantically around the apartment and, to my horror, found more cameras hidden in places I'd never even thought to check. There was one tucked behind a picture frame, another in the corner of the bookshelf, and a few more in the bathroom. The realization hit me like a freight train. Someone had been watching my every move, recording everything I did in my own home. The violation was overwhelming. I felt completely trapped and exposed. Every little thing I'd done, every private moment had been captured. I was shaking and trying to catch my breath as I stared at the cameras, my mind racing to figure out who could have done this. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't even know where to start. The sense of dread was suffocating. I gathered the cameras as evidence, hoping they'd lead me to the person responsible, but every step felt like a desperate scramble against a fear that I couldn't escape. I knew I couldn't just sit around anymore. I gathered up all the hidden cameras and saved every single message I'd received. With the evidence in hand, I started digging into the previous tenant and the history of the apartment. I found some disturbing stuff, a few reports of strange behavior from the last person who lived there, and hints that they might have had some unsettling obsessions. It took some effort, but I managed to track down a name and an address linked to the creepy messages. I was terrified, but determined. I contacted the police, handing over all the evidence I'd collected. The cops took it seriously and promised to investigate, but the waiting was torture. A few days later, they managed to locate the person behind the messages and cameras. It turned out they were indeed linked to the previous tenant, who had been keeping tabs on the apartment's new occupants out of some twisted fascination. The police arrested them, and at least that part of the nightmare was over. Even after all of that, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being violated. Knowing that someone had watched my every move in my own home left me feeling exposed and terrified. I had to move out and find a new place, but the experience haunted me for a long time. The trauma of being watched so intimately took a toll on my sense of security and trust, and it was a long road to feeling safe again. I've been living in this apartment complex for a couple of years now. It's a nice place, quiet, with friendly neighbors. Most of us know each other, at least well enough to say hi or make small talk in the hallway. When my elderly neighbor passed away a few months ago, it was sad. She'd been there forever, always waving to me when I got home from work. Since she was gone, her apartment next to mine stayed empty for a while. No one seemed interested in moving in, and it felt strange not having anyone there. Then one day, I noticed a moving truck outside. I peeked out of my window and saw some guys carrying furniture into the apartment next door. Finally, someone knew. A middle-aged guy, looked pretty normal, though he kept his head down most of the time. I thought I'd go introduce myself, just be friendly, you know? When I went out, I caught a quick glimpse of him. We exchanged a short hello, but he didn't look at me much, just kind of nodded and hurried inside. I didn't think much of it. Figured he was just shy or maybe wanted to keep to himself. Not everyone is chatty, right? I went back to my usual routine, not really expecting anything weird. Just another neighbor moving in, or so I thought. A few nights after the new guy moved in, I woke up to this weird noise. It was coming from the wall we share, the one between his apartment and mine. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again. A scratching sound, faint but persistent, like someone or something was clawing at the wall. I lay there, trying to figure out what it could be. Maybe he was moving furniture around late at night, or there was a rodent problem. I didn't want to overthink it, so I just tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. But then, over the next few days, things got weirder. Every time I looked out my window or stepped onto my balcony, there he was, just staring. His eyes would follow me, and it wasn't the friendly kind of stare. It was intense, almost like he was studying me. I tried to shake it off, told myself he was just awkward, or maybe didn't realize he was being creepy. But it kept happening. And every time our eyes met, he didn't look away. It made my skin crawl. And then the scratching sounds. They kept coming back, every night, always around the same time. It was getting harder to ignore. I started feeling more on edge, like I was being watched, even when I was alone in my own place. The whole situation was starting to freak me out. Something just didn't feel right about him, about the sounds, about any of it. I couldn't shake this growing sense of unease, like I was on the brink of discovering something I really didn't want to know. I came home one evening and saw something odd right away, a piece of paper sticking out from under my door. I bent down and picked it up, and as soon as I saw the handwriting, my stomach dropped. It was shaky and uneven, like someone wrote it in a hurry or was trembling. The note simply read, "Get away from me." That was it. No explanation, no signature, nothing. My mind raced. Why would my neighbor leave me this note? We hadn't even spoken more than a few words to each other. Was he warning me about something? Or was he just messing with me? I couldn't tell if he was trying to scare me or if he was scared himself. Either way, it freaked me out. I decided I needed answers. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and walked over to his door. I knocked a few times, trying to sound firm but not angry. No answer. I knocked again, a little louder this time, and called out, "Hey, it's Emily from next door. Can we talk?" Still nothing. The silence on the other side of the door was almost louder than the knocking. I even pressed my ear against the door, listening for any movement, any sign that he was in there, but it was dead quiet. Feeling a mix of frustration and fear, I went back to my apartment. I started to second-guess myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he wasn't the one who left the note. But if not him, then who? I had this inner knowing that something was really wrong. I tried to distract myself with TV, but I couldn't focus. All I could hear was that damn scratching again. It seemed more deliberate now, more like a message in itself. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, my mind spinning with questions. I kept asking myself if I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was off. Something was very, very wrong. The next day, I woke up to an eerie silence. For the first time in days, there was no scratching sound coming from the wall. At first, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe whatever was causing it had finally stopped. But then, as the morning went on, a new kind of worry started to creep in. Why did it stop so suddenly? It didn't feel right. I decided I needed to talk to someone about it. Maybe the building manager would have some answers. I went down to the office and explained the whole situation to him. The noises, the staring, the creepy note. As I was talking, I could see his expression changing from curiosity to confusion. "That's strange," he said, frowning. "No one's moved into that apartment yet." I blinked, not sure if I heard him right. "What do you mean no one's moved in?" "I saw a moving truck, and there's been a guy living there for over a week now." The manager shook his head. "We haven't processed any new leases for that unit. It's still listed as vacant in our system. Are you sure it wasn't just someone helping to clear things out, or maybe a contractor?" I felt a chill run down my spine. I had seen him with my own eyes. We exchanged greetings. I had knocked on his door. There was definitely someone there, but the manager's face told me he wasn't joking. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed a bag with essentials and went to stay with a friend. But before I left, I took one last look at the apartment next door. The door was slightly ajar. I felt a tug of curiosity. Maybe I could get a quick look inside. I pushed the door open slowly, and the smell hit me first. Musty, old, like the place hadn't been touched in years. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no signs of anyone ever living there. Just bare walls and dust. I didn't stay to explore. I ran out, my mind racing with 100 different possibilities, none of them good. I handed my keys to the manager and told him I was leaving for good. As I drove away, it seems to me that whatever or whoever had been in that apartment wasn't done. I moved to a new place on the other side of town, somewhere with lots of people around. I thought I'd be safe there, away from whatever was haunting that building. But every now and then, in the dead of night, I still hear that scratching, and I can't help but wonder if it ever really left me. When I moved to the city for a new job, finding a roommate was a top priority. I didn't know anyone here, and the rent was pretty steep on my own. So I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find someone reliable who wouldn't just be a stranger in my apartment. I got a response pretty quickly from a guy named Brian. His ad looked good. He seemed polite, had a stable job, and even shared my interest in classic films. We set up a time to meet at a coffee shop, and when we finally sat down together, Brian was exactly as he'd seemed in his messages. Friendly, easygoing, and really into the same movies I liked. He talked about how he was looking for a change of scenery and thought this city would be a good fit. We chatted for a while, and everything felt comfortable. He wasn't too pushy, and he seemed genuinely interested in living together as a way to make new connections and save some money. After the meeting, I felt pretty good about him. He checked all the boxes. Reliable, decent job, and we got along well. So I agreed to let him move in. He showed up with just a few boxes and a big duffel bag, and it looked like everything was going to work out smoothly. For the first few weeks, everything seemed to be going well. Brian was clean, quiet, and respectful. We didn't hang out much, but he was polite and kept to himself. I didn't have any issues, and it felt like the arrangement was working out. But then I started noticing a few weird things. Brian never really left the apartment, not even on weekends. It was unusual for someone to be around all the time, and it began to feel a bit off. Even more unsettling was hearing him talking to himself in hushed tones late at night. I could only catch bits of what he was saying through the thin walls, but it definitely sounded strange. One day, I was looking for the bathroom and accidentally opened Brian's door. I wasn't expecting to see much, but the room was surprisingly messy. What really caught my eye was a duffel bag sitting open on the floor. It was filled with what looked like knives. I tried to convince myself that maybe they were just tools or something, but seeing all those blades made me really uneasy. I started to worry if I was just being paranoid. Brian hadn't done anything overtly wrong, and he was always polite. but these little things kept gnawing at me. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense that something wasn't right. One evening, I got home early and found Brian sitting in the dark living room, just staring at the wall. It was weird, but he said he was thinking about moving out. Honestly, I was relieved to hear that. It seemed like a sign that things might finally get back to normal. But that night, things took a terrifying turn. I woke up in the middle of the night to find Brian standing over my bed, just staring at me. I was frozen in place, heart racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. When I confronted him, he said he was sleepwalking and apologized, but I couldn't shake off the fear. Things only got worse from there. Brian's behavior became more erratic. He started leaving strange notes around the apartment, things like, "I know what you did," and "You can't hide from me." It was like he was trying to play some twisted mind game. Every time I saw one of those notes, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. At this point, I was genuinely scared for my life. The notes, the strange behavior, Brian standing over me at night, it was all too much. I decided I needed to know more about who I was living with, so I started digging into Brian's background. I looked up the name he gave me, checked out the job he claimed to have, and I couldn't find anything. It was like the guy didn't even exist. The more I looked, the more I realized just how little I knew about him. I confronted him about it the next day. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could feel it shaking as I asked him, "Who are you really? Why are you here?" He just laughed, this cold, unsettling laugh that made my skin crawl. Then he said something that froze me to the core. "I'm leaving soon. Don't worry." There was something in the way he said it that felt like a threat, like he was planning something. I couldn't risk it. That night, I took every precaution I could think of. I pushed my dresser against the door, shoved a chair under the doorknob, anything to make sure he couldn't get in. I even kept my phone right next to me, ready to call for help if I needed it. Not only that, but I barely slept, just lay there in the dark, heart pounding, listening for any sound outside my door. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the window, felt like a sign that he was coming. That night, I was more on edge than ever. I had barricaded myself in my room, hoping it would be enough to keep Brian out, but my inner voice was telling me that something bad was about to happen. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing, and every noise sounded like it was right outside my door. I must have finally drifted off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the smell of smoke. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming. But then my eyes started burning, and I realized it was real. The apartment was filling with smoke. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. I shoved harder, panic setting in, and that's when I realized it was blocked from the outside. My heart pounded in my chest. Brian. I knew it had to be him. He had blocked my door and started the fire. I raced to the window, coughing from the thickening smoke. I could barely see, and my eyes were watering like crazy, but I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window pane as hard as I could. The glass shattered, and I didn't think twice. I climbed through the broken window, cutting my hands and arms on the jagged edges, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I hit the ground hard, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was a safe distance away. I turned back and watched as the flames swallowed my home. The fire roared, lighting up the night sky, and I could feel the heat from where I stood. I kept expecting Brian to come charging out of the front door, but he never did. The fire department arrived and put out the blaze, but it was too late. The apartment was destroyed. The police took my statement, and I told them everything I knew about Brian, but when they tried to find him, they came up empty. No ID, no job records, nothing. It was like he had never existed. They searched the remains of the apartment but found no trace of him. He had vanished without a trace. To this day, I have no idea who he really was or what he wanted from me. All I know is that I escaped with my life. When I booked the Airbnb for my business trip, I was just looking for a place where I could relax after a long day of meetings. Somewhere quiet and comfortable. The listing looked perfect. Nice, clean house in a calm suburban neighborhood. Good reviews saying how peaceful it was. I thought, yeah, this'll do. When I got there, the place was exactly like the photos. Well-maintained, tidy, with a cozy feel. The host, Sarah, had even left a little note on the kitchen counter with some instructions and a welcome message. She seemed friendly enough, even though I never actually met her in person. I liked that. I wasn't in the mood for small talk anyway. Just wanted to settle in and enjoy the quiet. That first night was pretty much ideal. I got back from my meetings, kicked off my shoes, and just chilled. No noise, no interruptions, just peace and quiet. I put on some TV, made myself a cup of coffee, and for the first time in a while, felt like I could actually unwind. The house had this really comforting vibe, and I thought to myself, yeah, I made the right choice coming here. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was just nice. I was looking forward to a few more nights of the same. The second night, I was just wandering down the hallway, heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, when I noticed it, a door. Weird, I could have sworn that door wasn't there before. It was plain, just blended right into the wall. I reached for the handle and tried to turn it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. Must be a storage closet or something, I thought. Maybe Sarah kept it locked for a reason. Whatever, I didn't think too much of it and went back to what I was doing. That's when the noise started. It was subtle at first, a faint tapping sound coming from behind the door. I figured it was probably just the house settling, or maybe a tree branch brushing up against a window outside. But the tapping continued, coming and going in these weird, irregular intervals. After a while, it became hard to ignore. I got up and checked the door again, still locked. I pressed my ear against it, trying to make out what was causing the noise, but it was just tapping. And I started to feel this creeping unease, like, what the hell is that? I decided to shoot Sarah a message. I tried to keep it casual, just asked if she knew anything about the door and mentioned the tapping sounds. She replied pretty fast, but what she said didn't make any sense. She claimed there wasn't any door like that in the house. I read her message a couple of times, just to make sure I wasn't missing something. No door? I thought maybe she misunderstood me, or I misunderstood her. It didn't add up, but I brushed it off, thinking it had to be some kind of mix-up. Maybe I was just tired, imagining things. The tapping got worse that night. It wasn't just faint taps anymore. It was louder, more constant. Every few minutes, I'd hear it again. Tap, tap, tap. It was starting to mess with my head. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe just the house settling, or my mind playing tricks on me because I was tired from all the meetings. But the more I tried to ignore it, the harder it was to block out. I tossed and turned, trying to fall asleep, but it seems to me that something was off. By the next morning, I was exhausted and on edge. I decided I needed to take a closer look at that door. I went up to it, inspected every inch, looking for something, anything, that might explain what was going on. The door looked totally normal, like it had always been there. But it didn't feel right. There was just something about it that made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just some weird feature of the house, maybe a design quirk or something. But that uneasy feeling, it stuck with me. When night came, the tapping started up again. This time, it was almost like there was a pattern to it, a rhythm. I laid in bed, listening to it, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like it was coming from right behind that door, like someone or something was in there, making that noise on purpose. My fear started to build, creeping up my spine. I couldn't shake it. Was I losing my mind? I wondered if the stress from work was finally getting to me, making me hear things that weren't there, but it didn't feel like my imagination. It felt real, too real. I couldn't take it anymore. The tapping had gotten to the point where it felt like it was echoing inside my head. I picked up my phone and called Sarah again, trying to keep my voice steady. This time, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told her straight up about the door, the noises, everything. But her response was the same, a flat-out denial. "There's no door like that in the house," she kept saying, over and over. Her voice was weirdly calm, almost robotic, like she wasn't even listening to what I was saying. It freaked me out even more. Why was she being so damn vague? That night, the tapping hit a whole new level. It was louder than ever, more aggressive, like someone or something was desperately trying to get out. My heart was racing, and my nerves were shot. I knew I had to get out of there. I didn't care about anything else. I just needed to leave. I started throwing my stuff into my bag, barely even thinking. I didn't bother turning off the lights or checking if I had everything. I just needed to be out of that house. As I was about to leave, I saw it, a note on the kitchen counter. I swear it wasn't there before. It was handwritten, shaky, like whoever wrote it was trembling. The words sent a chill straight down my spine. Don't come back. My blood ran cold. How the hell did it get there? I hadn't heard anyone come in. That was the last straw. I bolted out of the house, not even looking back. I drove straight to the nearest hotel, my mind racing. What the hell had I gotten myself into? Back at the hotel, I tried to calm myself down. To make sense of it all, I opened the Airbnb app on my phone, hoping to find some clue or maybe see if anyone else had gone through something similar. But when I searched for the listing, it was gone. Not just the house, but everything. The host, the reviews, all of it. It was like the place had never existed. I sat there stunned, staring at my screen. Whatever that house was, I was just glad I got out in time. I'm always on the lookout for new challenges. This time, I've decided to explore a remote forest that's been on my radar for a while. I'm called Tom, a slightly experienced hunter. It was supposed to be a pristine, untouched piece of wilderness, far from the usual hunting grounds I'm used to. Excitement buzzes through me as I drive towards the forest, my gear packed and ready for a weekend of hunting in a new environment. Upon arriving, the forest presents itself as a dense maze of towering trees and thick underbrush. The first thing that strikes me is the eerie silence that hangs over the place. The usual sounds of birds and wildlife are noticeably absent, replaced by a heavy, almost oppressive stillness. As I set up my camp, the quiet gets under my skin. The air feels thick, and the shadows cast by the dense foliage seem darker than usual. Despite this unsettling atmosphere, I'm determined to push past it. I focus on preparing my campsite, setting up my tent, and organizing my gear for an early start the next morning. The quiet is unnerving, but I brush off my unease, reminding myself that it's all part of the adventure. As dawn breaks, I head out into the forest with a sense of anticipation. The early morning light filters through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. I'm eager to find game, but as I delve deeper into the woods, I begin to notice some unusual signs. There are footprints that don't resemble any known animals I've encountered in this region. They're oddly shaped and too large to be from the usual wildlife. I pause to examine them, but they lead off into the underbrush, making it impossible to track. As I continue my hunt, the sense of being watched starts to creep in. The forest is still eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustling of leaves and faint whispers that seem to come from nowhere. I try to focus on my hunting, pushing the strange feelings to the back of my mind. Each time I hear a rustle or catch a glimpse of movement, I quickly turn to investigate, but there's nothing there. My unease grows, yet I push forward, determined to make the most of the day. The strange sensations and the unsettling silence make the hunt more challenging than I expected. But my curiosity and desire to find game keep me moving deeper into the forest. As the day wears on, the uneasy feelings only grow stronger. I start hearing footsteps behind me, and each time I spin around, there's nothing there. It's like someone or something is trailing me, but I can never catch a glimpse of it. The whispers in the trees become more distinct, almost like they're trying to communicate something, but I can't make out any words. My anxiety levels are through the roof. I keep looking over my shoulder, convinced that I'm being followed. The forest, which seemed so tranquil at first, now feels like a maze of shadows and unsettling sounds. The whispers and footsteps are relentless, making it hard for me to focus on anything other than the creeping paranoia that's setting in. I try to stay calm and rational, but the growing fear and the eerie atmosphere are starting to wear me down. When I finally make my way back to camp as night falls, my worst fears are confirmed. The camp is a mess, my gear is scattered everywhere, and the tent looks like it's been torn apart. The sight of my ruined campsite sends a wave of panic through me. It's clear that something, or someone has been through here. Desperate for safety, I start searching for a new place to set up for the night. But every spot I consider feels wrong. The feeling of being watched is overwhelming. The whispers in the darkness seem to follow me, growing louder and more insistent. I try to find a safe haven, but the shadows and the eerie sounds make it impossible to settle down. The forest has become a labyrinth of dread, and no matter where I go, I can't escape the sense of being hunted. I spend a sleepless night in the forest, tormented by the whispers and the overwhelming feeling of being pursued. Every rustle and snap keeps me on edge, and I can't shake the sense that something is watching me. Despite my fear, I manage to stay alert and keep moving, hoping to outlast whatever is causing this paranoia. As dawn breaks, the forest begins to look less menacing in the early morning light. The whispers fade away with the rising sun, and the unsettling feeling of being watched starts to dissipate. Exhausted but relieved, I pack up what's left of my camp and make my way back to my truck. The drive home is a welcome escape, and as I leave the forest behind, I can't help but feel a profound sense of relief. The experience leaves me with a lingering unease, but I'm grateful to have made it through the night and back to safety. I decided to switch up my usual running route and try this new park I'd heard about. It was one of those secluded spots with just a few street lamps casting dim light over the path, perfect for a quiet evening jog, or so I thought. As I picked up my pace, I noticed a figure a few hundred meters ahead of me. At first, I thought it was just another runner, but something felt off. The figure moved at an unusually slow, deliberate pace, completely out of sync with my rhythm. I tried to close the gap, but no matter how fast I ran, the figure stayed just out of reach. It was like an eerie game of cat and mouse. The park was so isolated, and the sparse lighting made everything feel extra creepy. I could barely see the figure's details, just a vague shape ahead of me. I shook off the weird feeling, telling myself it was probably nothing, but the slower pace of that figure was starting to get to me. The way they moved just felt unsettling, especially in the darkness of that park. I kept pushing myself to ignore the unease that had settled in, focusing on my breathing and trying to shake off the creepy vibe. But it didn't get any better. As I continued running, I noticed the figure's behavior getting stranger. They'd stop every so often, turn around, and look right at me, even though I was still a good distance away. It felt like they were watching me, and the longer it went on, the more unnerved I became. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe the figure was just taking a break or had some kind of weird running style. But every time they looked back, my anxiety spiked. The park's isolation made it worse. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow, seemed to heighten my fear. I was beginning to feel that something was off. It was like being in a low-budget horror film, where the protagonist is always just a step behind the danger. Even though I kept trying to rationalize what was happening, I couldn't help but feel more and more paranoid. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something I didn't want to. The figure's odd behavior and the oppressive darkness around me were turning what was supposed to be a peaceful jog into an unsettling ordeal. As I got closer to the park bench, I could finally make out more details of the figure. To my horror, I saw that it was a man dressed in ragged clothes, looking like he hadn't seen a shower or a fresh set of clothes in ages. His appearance was disheveled, and he was sitting on the bench, facing away from me. My heart raced even faster as I approached, hoping maybe he'd just be some guy who'd sit there and ignore me. But just as I was about to pass by, he suddenly stood up. The movement was sudden and jarring, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He started walking toward me at a brisk pace, his ragged clothes flapping slightly with each step. I sped up, my anxiety spiking as I realized this wasn't just a casual jogger or a harmless passerby. The man was moving quickly, and his determined stride made it clear he was closing in on me. I tried to run faster, but it felt like no matter how hard I pushed myself, he was always a step behind, getting closer and closer. The park bench and the man's sudden, deliberate movement felt like a scene straight out of a thriller. My mind raced, and every nerve in my body screamed that something was very wrong. The park, once a place of potential relaxation, was now a stage for my growing terror, as I realized this man might be more than just an unsettling presence. He could be a serious threat. I made a split-second decision and veered sharply off the path, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I ducked behind a large oak tree, trying to stifle my heavy breathing and catch my breath. I could hear the man's footsteps growing closer, his labored breathing echoing through the otherwise silent park. As I crouched behind the tree, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs felt amplified, heightening my terror. I peered out from behind the tree trunk, the dim light from the street lamps barely reaching this part of the park. Through the darkness, I saw the man standing in the open space where I'd just been running. He wasn't moving. Instead, he was scanning the area with a chilling intensity, his ragged silhouette barely visible in the shadows. My heart was in my throat, and I could barely breathe as I watched him. It felt like time was dragging, and just as I was about to make a break for it, hoping to find safety elsewhere, I heard the distant wail of sirens. The sound grew louder, and I saw the man's posture stiffen. Without warning, he retreated into the darkness, disappearing into the dense trees. The arrival of the sirens brought a fleeting sense of relief, though my body was still trembling from the adrenaline. I waited a few moments longer, ensuring the man was truly gone, before cautiously making my way back to the park's exit. When I finally reached the park exit, I saw a patrol car parked nearby. I rushed over, breathless and shaking, and explained everything to the officers. I told them about the figure, how he had been following me, and how he'd started walking toward me with an alarming intensity. The officers listened with polite nods, but their expressions were skeptical. They followed me back to the park, but by then, the area was quiet and empty. They searched the vicinity, but there was no sign of the man, no trace of his presence, or any evidence of what I described. The officers returned to me with expressions that conveyed more doubt than concern. They suggested that I might have been mistaken, or that my fear had heightened my perception of a harmless situation. They assured me it was probably just a coincidence and advised me to be more cautious when running in unfamiliar areas. Their dismissive attitude left me feeling even more unsettled. The gap between my harrowing experience and their indifferent response was stark and disheartening. I knew what I'd seen and felt, but with no evidence to back up my account, I felt helpless and alone. As I walked back to my apartment, the night felt colder and darker. The unsettling encounter had left a mark on me, making me wary of running in unfamiliar places again. Alex and I had been hearing stories about this old Victorian house on the outskirts of town for years. The place had been abandoned for decades after the whole family that lived there vanished without a trace. We'd always been curious about it, so one afternoon, we decided to finally check it out. When we pulled up to the house, it was just as creepy as we'd imagined. The place was falling apart. Broken windows, vines crawling up the sides, and a roof that looked like it could cave in any second. It was the kind of place that gave you chills just by looking at it. We pushed open the front door, and a blast of musty air hit us like a wall. The floorboards creaked ominously under our feet as we stepped inside. The whole place smelled of old dust and neglect, and the sudden chill made me shiver. Despite the eerie vibe, we were excited to explore the place. We wandered through the house, and it felt like stepping into another era. The rooms were dimly lit by the few rays of sunlight that managed to filter through the dirty windows. Old furniture was covered with dusty white sheets, and family portraits hung crookedly on the walls, their faces half hidden in shadow. The whole place felt frozen in time, like no one had touched anything since the day the family disappeared. The silence was unnerving, and every creak of the floorboards seemed louder than it should be. The heavy air and oppressive stillness made me question whether we should have come here. But curiosity pushed us on, even as a sense of dread grew stronger with each step. We kept exploring the upstairs when we heard it, faint at first, like a distant thud. It grew louder and more distinct until it sounded like a door slamming shut somewhere in the house. We stopped in our tracks, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. It wasn't just a door slamming. As we listened more carefully, we realized there were muffled screams mixed in with the noise. It sounded like someone, or something, was trapped and desperately trying to get out. The chilling realization that these sounds were coming from somewhere within the house made my heart race. Our initial excitement about exploring this abandoned place turned into sheer panic. The oppressive atmosphere and the terrifying sounds were too much to ignore. Every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind felt amplified as we hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to decide what to do next. Despite our growing fear, our curiosity pushed us to investigate further. We took a deep breath and slowly climbed the stairs, our footsteps echoing loudly in the eerie silence. The closer we got to the source of the noise, the more our anxiety grew. Each step felt heavier as we approached the upper floors, our minds racing with dread and anticipation. As Alex and I hurried back downstairs, our hearts pounding, we made a horrifying discovery. The front door we had come through was now locked. We yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Our panic surged as we realized that the door was securely shut, and no matter how hard we pushed or pulled, it remained firmly in place. Desperate, we darted around the house, searching for another exit. We tried windows, back doors, anything we could find, but everything was locked or stuck. The sense of being trapped grew more intense with every passing second. Then, just as we were about to lose hope, a chilling whisper cut through the panic. "Get out!" The voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, its eerie echo reverberating through the empty house. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking, amplifying our fear. We looked at each other, our faces pale, knowing that whatever was happening, it was beyond our control. The whisper drove us into a frenzy, and we redoubled our efforts to find a way out, every second feeling like an eternity. In a state of panic, Alex and I knew we had to get out of there. We smashed a window with a nearby piece of furniture, the glass shattering with a loud crash that echoed through the empty house. We scrambled through the broken opening, tumbling out onto the overgrown lawn. Once we were outside, we didn't waste any time. We ran as fast as we could, not daring to look back at the house. The eerie silence that followed us felt like it was pressing in from all sides, amplifying our fear. We kept running until we were far away from the property, catching our breath and trying to calm our racing hearts. Even after we were safe, the experience stayed with us. The memory of the house and those disturbing sounds haunted both of us. We agreed that the house had tried to trap us, to keep us inside with whatever or whoever was making those awful noises. The whispering voice still echoed in our minds, and we both felt an unsettling sense of dread every time we thought about that afternoon. The house wasn't just abandoned. It felt like it was alive, and it wanted us to stay forever.